So, we start the next class 7, and here we begin to study the health effects of most of these gaseous pollutants, some of the gaseous pollutants. Let me explain why how these studies, what these studies reveal as such. See the sulfur dioxide as a pollutant. So, say this is on normal persons here. Normal persons or subjects, so what we see here is that for a normal person, this is just challenge studies is there is key. Normal subjects, they for all these cases we can see there are few things. There is consistent evidence that normal persons are less sensitive to the effects of inhaled SO2, less sensitive to normal inhaled effects of inhaled SO2 than COPD patients. The COPD means here is chronic COPD and asthmatic patient, asthmatic patients. COPD is chronic obstructional obstructional. Besides write this obstructional, let me write it again. Chronic obstructional pulmonary disease. COPD, this is so inhaled SO2 than COPD or asthmatic patients. Asthmatic patient, the COPD, let me explain this COPD a little bit. The COPD, what I began by this discussion is that the studies, what the studies reveal, for the normal person there is a consistent evidence that normal persons are less sensitive to the effects of inhaled SO2 than COPD or asthmatic patients. The COPD patients are chronic obstructional pulmonary disease. This is like all kind of cough and cold. The patients prone to cough and cold, cough and cold, cough and cold allergens, related breathing COPD, as we can explain this, COPD patient is basically chronic obstructional pulmonary disease. The patients prone to cough and cold, allergens and related breathing disorders. Now this is what is observed is it is generally shown it's generally observed that 10 minutes exposure 10 minutes exposure at say 1000 ppb level, 10 minutes exposure at 1000 ppb would lead to you know small increases in airways resistance, small increases in airways resistance. See, let me explain you this part of this part here. What happens is small increases in airways resistance. See, is the case is clearly like you know that if you're in a particularly say in a wintry night if you are running a bike or anything like that with no cover at the throat. So what happens is after the bike ride you will find that your throat is choking. I mean the usual case of cough and cold. What essentially happens? The essential things that happen is we say if we just try to explain it a little bit here, say in most cases say if you just see the respiratory tract, if you see the respiratory tract is like this, is about a multi layer structures of multi-fiber structures here in the throat. This is what is the throat through which the air passes. What happens on this is in this, if this is the airway, that is the airway, so through which the throat airway you can see is the airway. This airway, on this airway, if you just see here, there are you see these liquids mucus here, mucus and mucus likes liquids here. These are mostly the liquids which generally come to saliva also, and many a time come to saliva, just like as you find in the saliva itself. These are in the liquid form. These are in the liquid form, mostly a very liquid form, so that what it does is it reduces the air resistance, as a result of which otherwise what would have happened is the air that we are breathing in would have worn out, or we would have impacted our surface. So the surface needs a certain kind of lubrication, so that the air when you are drawing in air and leaving air, this needs a certain kind of lubrication in the respiratory tract itself. So in the respiratory tract, when it is this lubrication reduces the resistance, and as a result of which we can comfortably breathe and we can exhale air, inhale air like this. Now what happens is when there is a certain kind of temperature differential, or there some kind of dust is entering into this area, this particular surfaces they are very sensitive. They are sensitive to allergens, particularly these substances, say a sulfur dioxide or say dust or any kind of these things would be actually an allergen which would deal with this. Is they would immediately, the response would be from the throat side, response would be as a means of resistance again to solidify this one, and this the mucus which is generally in the liquid form would be semi-solid by that. So this mucus, this semi-solid mucus is basically it's irreversible. It cannot again go back to the liquid formation again. So what happens is, if you have developed a cough here, the cough has to come out some way, or you have to send it to the digestive channel, or you have to make use of a certain medication so that this stiffness gets reduced. So what happens is this, as a result of this stiffening of this mucus, this airway begins to constrict, begins to reduce. The airway which was this, the total surface area begins to reduce. So, as a result of which, the new surface area may be only about this much, only about say reducing to this much. So, if this is the surface area through which only the air can pass, then you very well understand the lung require a certain capacity of air all the time. So, for the same capacity of air, it has to breathe more, it has to pump more. So, that is the typical effect of cough and cold, starting of cough and cold, and particularly this becomes very severe for those people who are extremely allergic to this kind of substances, like those who are suffering from asthma or those who are suffering from chronic COPDs, like not asthma, but they are very sensitive to allergens. There are many people who cannot tolerate dust at any point. Even a small dust is is a very harmful for them. Even some pollens are very highly allergen to them. Say we live in this campus, for the people like us, this pollens when they come out, they have of no consequence. But there are some people, for whom the pollens when they come out, the pollens from the flowers, they become extremely allergic. They become extremely allergic, and there are many people who suffer for months together due to this allergic causing substances. So, here also the same thing takes place. So, as such this is what is so said here. This, as I said, is at 10 minutes exposure for say at 1000 ppb concentration, we can see small increases in the airways resistance. This is the start. In a normal subject at 1000 ppb, when the SO2 concentration is at 1000 ppb, and if it is an exposure for 10 minutes, we generally observe a particular small increases in the airway resistance. But this is also very temporary. As soon as you go out of this environment, it can clear off, because the effect is not magnified till that point of time. But this effect begins to magnify with as you can see, for 10 minutes exposure, so similar exposure is similar exposures at 4 ppm or greater, clear increased reduction of airways passage, leading to increased resistance. Right? When we see this in asthmatic subjects, particularly the effects of SO2, as particularly as you can see, as the exposures become more and more, there will be further reduction in the airways resistance, and there will be some quasi permanent say effects, like the effect might remain for 10 days, 15 days, like this. So, at more than that, so as such, when happens is, say related to this is particularly increase in SO2 level, SO2 level increased, plus already affected with cold, temperature changes can lead to increased effect, reduction in airways passage, bronchial infection, fever, congestion, etc. So, you can see this. So, this is the effect of SO2. I mean, say in an asthmatic substance, asthmatic patients, you write asthmatic patients, there is airway changes, whereas the first one is, say at 110 minutes at 100 ppb, increased airways resistance takes place. What started as for a normal subject at 1000 ppb can be observed at 100 ppb for asthmatic subjects. Asthmatic patients would start as an earlier time. So, they will be more directly affected by the presence of sulfur dioxide. When you can see this, so this effect, another very interesting aspect of this, you see 10 minutes, if you just observe this 10 minutes 400 ppb plus exercise, physical exercise, the effects become more pronounced. Effects gets more pronounced. So, that is what one reason for which if it is a heavily polluted traffic way or heavily slightly polluted traffic way, particularly say during the time when there is a vehicular pollution is more, that time one should not run across, mostly along the roadsides. One should not run along the roadsides, because in such cases the possibility that you can catch cold, or you can have some kind of infection, breathing related infection due to the allergic response. Remember all this, these are mostly the allergic response. Allergic responses are like this. It's not a bacterial or say fungal reactions like this. It's an allergen. That is also allergen related, but relatively different. Here what happens is that this substances, a high dose of relatively high dose of sulfur dioxide can initiate irritation in the air passage in the throat, by means of this, particularly this mucus and the surface become sensitive. Something like quite like if you have some kind of say whenever you have sometimes if you are cleaning your room, you will find that if you are if some way your hand comes in contact with the spider web or something, it begins to irritation begins to take place. The similar kind of things takes place here. The usual contact itself that is what is happening there. The skin is allergic to the allergen. Allergen is the spider web. The material in the spider web is the allergen, and the skin is allergic to that particular substance. So here, as the skin has already developed an allergy, similarly the throat and the passage in the throat would also generate a certain kind of allergy to that, and the allergy would lead to the constriction or reduction in the airway passage. And as the reduction in the airway passage begins, so all kind of breathing disorders begin to take place. So as I said, exercise relatively prompts far more effects. See, there is something to relate it to is the morbidity study. See, this is the morbidity studies that we have generally as morbidity studies. So the conclusion in the morbidity studies is morbidity studies say increased exposure. These are the temporary effects. The increased effects is there is no evidence to suggest that the usual exposure of SO2 in the environment for infrequent exposure. There is no evidence to suggest that the usual exposure of SO2 in the environment for relatively infrequent exposures can cause morbidity. There is no evidence to suggest that the usual exposure of SO2 in the environment for relatively infrequent exposures can cause morbidity. However, long continuous exposure might lead to, however, long and continuous exposure might lead to permanent deformations of bronchial apparatus. Long and continuous exposure might lead to permanent deformations of bronchial apparatus, like something like, say, those people, something like you have seen in your household, like their grandmother or even your mother also, those who are burning coal, say for their for their hearth or something like that, say chula and all this kind of substance. So here if they are consistently exposed, suppose they work in a closed room, they work in a closed room where there is a good amount of sulfur dioxide, and they are exposed for a long time, quite long time, say usually over a day, over a long time, and particularly if the concentration of sulfur dioxide is pretty much, say something like, as you can see here itself, as we have seen sometime about 4 ppm, or even say in 4 ppm, or say even 10 ppm like this. In such case, a consistent exposure might relate to some kind of permanent morbidity. Morbidity can result in the sense like a certain part of the bronchial apparatus might be completely damaged. Say a lung may be not working in the same capacity, the capacity has reduced. So the permanent deformation has taken place. So there may be other kind of disorders that can take place due to that kind of situation. So this morbidity, these are the morbidity studies, which says that SO2 can impact that. Mortality, mortality studies, just to mortality studies, there are no in cities with heavy SO2 smogs, heavy SO2 smogs show increased fatality from hospital records. In cities with heavy SO2 smogs show increased fatality from hospital records, but isolation, but to isolate them as the cause, but to isolate them as the cause of due to increased SO2 is often not possible. So you can see, but it says that what is same is that what is observed is that in case if there is higher SO2 in the cities, mostly in the cities having a consistently high SO2, show generally increased fatality. Something like this. Let me explain you something like this. Suppose if you just observe say Mumbai and say Kolkata or even say Calcutta compared to Kharagpur. So okay, let us compare these two cases. If there are higher SO2, generally say the concentration of sulfur dioxide in the city areas in both the cases, Calcutta and Kharagpur, if we find that Calcutta has more sulfur dioxide, what one can see is say for every lakh of population, the death cases may be say every day may be 20 or 30 in Calcutta, whereas in Kharagpur it may be 10. Now, but the only important thing we know that is the increase in the death may be due to the air pollutants. But which air pollutant is again a difficult question. So whether it is because of sulfur dioxide or because of carbon monoxide or because of nitrogen dioxide, separating them from one cause to another is extremely difficult. That is not always possible. So, here in cells, so the mortality studies, this is, I took up this because in many cases we have to go into studies like this, where we would be mostly dealing with this kind of studies in different areas. So, we must know, first of all, this remains one great problem of environmental movement, environmental regulations, is that to separate the causes. It is now becoming somewhat possible over a long exposure, say voluntary studies, where the studies where the people voluntarily take part. Say suppose something like in a chamber like this, you are routinely exposed to sulfur dioxide, and the 10 or 15 subjects are routinely subjected to sulfur dioxide, and then over the years the records are being taken, and then finally after 10 or 15 years of study, one can suggest whether there is an effect of SO2, say SO2 dosage, that is that one gets in the room, has any effect with their health. So, this kind of segregated cases are not possible always, and there is no such study currently undergoing ways to suggest that sulfur dioxide related or sulfur dioxide influenced mortality. Okay. So, this kind of uncertainties consistently remain. So, there are few more cases like there are many cases like nitrogen dioxide. I just begin discussion about nitrogen dioxide, to normal subjects, normal persons or subjects. Exposures of or less for a period of 20 minutes exposures of 100,000 ppb or less for a period of 20 minutes to 2 hours show bronchial restlessness, but no apparent loss in lung function. However, exposures of 1.5 ppm for 3 hours, 1.5 to 7.5 ppm for 3 hours, exposure of 1.5 ppm to 7.5 ppm for 3 hours, bronchial responsiveness is visible by disrupted lung function. See here in the first case, in SO2, I never referred to lung actually. It's generally in case. Here it is we are referring to lung. So nitrogen dioxide at this concentration can have effect on the lung, and here you can see the visible, if it is exposure 1.5 to 7.5 ppm for 3 hours, the bronchial restiveness, that is some kind of uneasiness, bronchial something like you cannot breathe well, you cannot you are having some restiveness in it, is visible by disrupted lung function. So, but before that, as you can see 1000 ppb or less and 20 minutes to 2 hours show bronchial restlessness, but no apparent loss in lung function. There will be some uneasiness, but there is no loss of lung function. So, this is what is the effects. Patients with say COPD and asthmatic patients, COPD and asthmatic patients, .250 ppb, 250 to 500 ppb, 500 ppb for say 30 minutes, 30 minutes. Visible lung function disruption by excessive breathing and restlessness. Visible lung function disruption by excessive breathing and restlessness observed, right. This is generally, this is 30 minutes, just as COPD patients, as you can see, this is 250 ppb to 500 ppb for 30 minutes, visible lung function disruption by excessive breathing and restlessness observed. Okay. So, here is, this is about the nitrogen dioxide and increased nitrogen dioxide and increased nitrogen dioxide has an effect on morbidity. They say morbidity effect morbidity effects at high concentration, say about at high concentration, say at ppm level more than say 100, that is more than 25 to 100 ppm at high concentration in association with other pollutants, at high concentration in association with other pollutants in association with other pollutants at high concentration ppm level more than 25 to 100 in association with other pollutants morbidity may occur. The morbidity may occur. So, mortality studies almost similar to SO2. There is no distinct evidence to suggest this is the mortality has resulted if from specific nitrogen dioxide cases, like increased level of nitrogen dioxide has not caused any mortality as such. I mean, with its individual effect. So, but it is a combined effect, it can certainly have that much of related aspects. Like this is, as you can see, okay, carbon monoxide, this one is another is CO, carbon monoxide. One of this method, as you know, that see the mechanism is so let me tell the mechanism first. As you know, CO poisoning, what is the effect of CO poisoning? Fainting and death. That is clearly the CO poisoning. What happens? See, it's mostly, as you know, this CO carboxyhemoglobin. Carboxyhemoglobin, COHB results. In red blood cells, light. Just see these standards, the typical values. You see, normal persons, normal unexposed persons. We have all normal persons, particularly suppose in a room like this. In a room like this, all of us have certain level of carboxyhemoglobin, because this is an environment where it is the airflow is somewhat restricted. So, basically in air conditioned rooms. So, CHB, the normal CHB levels are 1% or below, 1% or less. Normal, this one is like this. Cigarette smokers, cigarette smokers, this can rise up to, say, COHB is 4% to 15%. Just 1 minute. This is so here it is a cigarette smokers, mostly about that, this the cases of fatality cases. Fatality cases generally when it is COHB, normally the fatality cases started, normally in this most cases the fatality cases started at 30% of fatality cases when carboxyhemoglobin related fatalities begin to take place at level more than 30%. Say the typical thing is oxyhemoglobin. So oxyhemoglobin is when the oxygen combines with hemoglobin. So when oxygen combines with hemoglobin is just for a transfer of oxygen from the air to the blood. So this the hemoglobin becomes a medium by which it can the blood carries the oxygen across the veins to different cells. Okay. Now on the other hand, when this carboxyhemoglobin, what happens is in the presence of carbon monoxide in the air, the red blood corpuscles RBCs have a tendency to prefer carbon monoxide against oxygen. So they would form carboxyhemoglobin. So this carboxyhemoglobin should be, what happens is they would be carried through the blood. So as they would be carried through the blood, there would not be any exchange of oxygen across the cells, or the exchange of cells would be reduced. So if the exchange of cells is reduced, so the initial response in such cases would be fainting, because there would be not sufficient supply of oxygen. But if that can continue for some time, if that continues for some time, the morbidity takes place. The mortality takes place, where it can be fatal in such cases. This takes place, particularly one usual case is, very recently. Let me tell you a small example of that. Recently, there was a suicide committed in Japan. Some 8 or 9 people committed suicide. What they essentially did is, very simply, what they did is that inside a car, they have kept a earthen fire chula kind of thing, and let that chula burn. So what happened is the air was completely circulated. There was no passage of air. So essentially, first it was carbon dioxide. Then in preference to, so since there is lack of air, so the carbon monoxide began to be formed. The persons, they were chatting together as if they are talking together. Then finally, the poisoning begins to take place. So one by one, they fell unconscious, and then the chula began to go on like that. And as at the end of that, the concentration level increased so much that all of them died. So it was, this is what is a typical case, where the fatality cases can begin to rise, about more than 30% of the carboxyhemoglobin.
That was an accident or
Suicide case. It's a typical suicide. It's the way it committed. The many people, this way many people do that. Right? This is what is the carboxy. Particularly one important thing of carbon monoxide poisoning is that people do not get to know that they are being poisoned. They are suffering. In many cases, simply because there would be reduced oxygen in their body, they would try to exert more. And as they try to exert more, they become conscious at a relatively lesser time.
Sir, another one very good particular characteristic of carbon monoxide is that your face will look pinks and you will
that is very smart, energetic, and things like that. Glowing, your face would be glowing. So it's another important aspect. But that glowing, I tell you, in very many cases, I have seen, say, mostly those are people who suffer from, say, cases like diabetes, cases like other exposures like that. You will also find that their faces glow. So, there will be relatively some shine. That is also one bad aspect of a person. It's just when you'd see that the faces are somewhat swollen, and they look somewhat, the color looks brighter, more oily they look. This is also a symptom that they are suffering. So
another very good experience of CO is your brain will starts working in opposite direction. Suppose if there is a way, you have to go there, then your brain will say that you have to go in
opposite direction. Okay.
Then you cannot decide it.
You cannot decide. You cannot decide. And that happens. That happens because of any kind of, particularly this reasonableness that you find out with some reasoning. That the reasoning, the capacity of reasoning reduces mostly with all this kind of pollutants. So we will find out this CO mechanism. While deal with some other cases of CO mechanism also. So okay, I will take up another gas for some time, then we will discuss something more. So today we close at carbon monoxide. We will take up another gas on another time, and particularly right, we were discussing about the effects of gaseous pollutants on human health. Today, we will discuss more on the aspect of particulate matters. More importantly, or more specifically, the mechanism of lung injury caused by PM10. As I said, it's no longer necessary nowadays. It's no longer, it is told as silica 5 micron or something like that. We generally consider this to be PM10. This is the standard nomenclature now. Nobody talks about silica 5 micron silica or things like that. That are usually popular in various terminologies like in mining. So here, as I think I have discussed about this PM10, how we explain the PM10. Now, having said this, just let me explain you this, how this effects take place. This is, say, first of all, in the airways, there are three mechanisms actually by which this the PM10 influences the human health. First is airways. This is, as we know this, particularly as I was discussing, the defenses of pulmonary airways comprise the leukocytes. So, typical leukocytes. These leukocytes, what happens is they generally work as a mediators for lung injury. That means they resist the lung injury. Whatever the dust particles are there, they would immediately they are tuned to resist the dust being entering the bloodstream. So what happens is consistent exposure of dust makes them ineffective. Their deformability, decreased PMN deformability in the pulmonary microcirculation, that is continuously. This is one effect that relates to the decreased deformability, decreased PMN deformability of the microcirculation. And here, this one finally, what happening is, as a result of that, continuously, as you can see this, continuously from this, this would lead to the deformation change. This would lead to the changes which I am coming back, I will come back to this again. This one is here, this particularly pulmonary inflation would reveal, a particularly is, this exacerbation of airways disease. what happens here is, just try to understand, suppose you have already a patient suffering from COPD or say asthma, this would increase. Exacerbations means this would be particularly asthmatic patients would be having more higher say the rhythms of heart and rhythms of lung, where it would continuously vibrate at a higher speed or at a higher frequency. So this kind of exacerbations increase. Their age would be mostly about say within 40. Very few rickshaw pullers you would say would survive say the age of 50 years or 55 years or 60 years. They don't survive. So the condition is, this is what I am saying, is that consistent exposure, episodial exposures when there are small large exposure for small time but over a long duration, over a long period of time, they can generate morbidity in the first place, and from the morbidity itself they can generate mortality. Suddenly that you can see the other habits are also important. Say if he is a smoker, or if he drinks, or he uses some other say the substances like tobacco and all other kind of stuff that he can take, all this situation they together can be aggravate the situation. The situation can even go worse. Okay. So this kind of things, these are the likely situations that takes place, the related kind of diseases and the typical say the exposure related problems of most of these gas and gaseous particulates and the particulates. Okay. So I have mostly discussed of these health effects. I'll see is generally you will have some idea about what kind of health effects usually take place. Apart from that, there are few things I would like to just, these are the things, say air quality standards. I would say mostly this you find this nowadays in the websites and any other places. This is for our country, it is Central Pollution Control Board. The standards which are generally famous is, another is National Ambient Air Quality Standards, NACS, this is which is USA and UK.